In this video, I want to explore a topic about the thinking mind literally taking over reality and no one even noticing. So the premise is that the thinking mind first confused its abstract ideas with physical reality. Um, so there are ideas such as government, or what I didn't know, self, no problem, was basically explore the idea of the self, which often gets mistaken for a real, tangible, physical thing. And it's not, it's just an idea. And it has a totally different feeling when you take an idea seriously and take it part of reality versus see it as what it is, which is just an idea. And then we get into collective ideas like government. And it's fascinating that this has been something that human beings have been doing to more and more excess. So when you look at the 20th century, by far the bloodiest century in human history, with 100 million dying in war, I think it's 250 million dying at the hands of their own government. And some would say, well, it's technology. We first had the technology to be able to do this suffering on such a massive level. But I would argue that tied in with that to a very high degree is this, what I've been talking about in the last video, this fallacy of misplaced concreteness, this fallacy where we mistake an idea, which some ideas, many ideas are very useful. Even the idea of government could be useful as long as it's always looked at as an idea for what it is. Same thing with the self. The self is a very useful idea. I can go out and get in my car. Same with ownership. I mean, all these ideas are useful if they are seen for what they are. That is, an idea. Same thing with the group. Think about any group. There's no physicality that holds that group together. It's all an abstract idea in the left brain. But the interesting thing about these groups is that while they are themselves illusory, they can bring about real world consequences. But it's one thing to mistake an idea for a thing in the world. But what seems to be happening now is that the idea virus has become so pronounced that it's going back into reality and starting to claim that reality is its own creation. So in the 90s, Sokol, I think it was the 90s, but Sokol did a hoax paper. And what he had done was publish a paper that gravity is a social construct, which is to say that gravity itself, something that is obviously part of real physical reality, is just an abstract, a thought in the mind. And of course, the interesting thing about this is the paper got published, and it isn't a surprise that it will get published by intellectuals. When we see this this abstraction virus, this tendency to mistake real world things like gravity for products of the mind, it makes sense that they would be coming from academia, where the mind is so pronounced. Now, the really cool thing about this is when you go back and you see when the mind virus started to take, that is to say, when we started to think, you can see that that's the birth of shamanism. So these spiritual people emerged right when we first started thinking. And I'm going to guess that that was kind of a counterbalance to the thinking mind to keep us in reality. And shamans across the planet, the one thing that they have in common is that they found nature, physical reality, to be sacred. The earth wasn't some kind of dead, lifeless matter. The earth, mountains, lakes, all of this was alive with energy because it was physical reality that brought life to being. And so it too also had to be alive. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's not just the shamans. So if you look in Buddhism, the whole Zen Buddhist trip is if you're peeling potatoes and your mind is wandering somewhere else, you're not spiritual. You're only spiritual if you're peeling potatoes and actually doing what you're doing, which is to say you are in physical reality. So the moment we leave physical reality with some type of abstraction, we start mind wandering about what we're going to do over the weekend, we jump off the spiritual path. So it was a few hundred years ago, probably in Western science, that a couple Western scientists, when they started looking at reality, they sort of killed it with the abstract mind, which is to say, when they looked through the lens, when they looked at reality through the lens of the thinking mind, all they saw was lifeless matter floating, randomly in the cosmos. And that's so different than how the shamans saw reality. And you could even say the shamans didn't really see or know reality, they experienced it. And that's why it was so sacred. It was this, deep experience that they had rather than thinking about it. Now, again, the point of this video is that the thinking mind has become more pronounced, and it has started to actually take over the real physical world. That's why the thinking mind just assumes gravity is just a social construct. And I can tell you, I was just at the Grand Canyon. So I've been gone for a while. And when you're at the Grand Canyon, you can intellectualize and say that gravity is a social construct, but no one behaves that way. That edge seems very real, and it does feel there's an energy that if you stop thinking, you can feel this energy and vastness, and it's so humbling to the thinking mind. So it's such a cool experience. But this is exactly the opposite of this philosophical movement that has the mind taking over and taking credit for physical reality. And I talked about it in a few videos, but of course, this is postmodernism. In postmodernism, language, the thinking mind, which thinks in language most of the time, is claiming ontological status. It's claiming that reality exists because of thinking, because of language. So I'm going to give you a couple quotes. They're kind of chilling, but I'll give you a couple quotes from Derrida. There is nothing outside of the text. In other words, nothing exists outside of thinking about it through words. But this one is particularly chilling. I always dream of a pen that would be a syringe. Again, this idea that, words are creating reality, that the Grand Canyon didn't exist until we thought about it. So the point of the video is that, particularly in intellectual worlds, the thinking mind is laying claim to the actual existence of physical reality. But that is so paradoxical because what is the mindfulness movement? Mindfulness is when you become conscious, aware of what you're doing when you're doing it, and you're not thinking anymore. It's literally the exact opposite position. The same thing with the Zen Buddhist movement, and it's the same thing with the shamans who not only focused their attention on physical reality, but actually considered it sacred.